And we shall now recall that what happened in the White House this week was that President Obama bestowed the Medal of Freedom on 15 recipients. That Medal of Freedom was established by John F. Kennedy, whose assassination we mark today. It occurred 50 years ago. I know, Ron, that you were in junior high school at the time. I was a young married woman and had the opportunity to go to the East Room of the White House to pay respects when the coffin was brought back to Washington before it went to the Rotunda. It's a moment etched in both my life and my husband's life. You were 13 and studying algebra.
My algebra teacher stood at the blackboard, and we had earlier heard the president had been shot, but we didn't know what his fate might be. And so some minutes had gone by. We were sitting in class, and when the principal came on and said the president has died, the teacher paused briefly, said, "That's really too bad, that young man." She paused, she looked around, and she said, "Well, let's get back to those equations."
Wow.
And she was that kind of teacher, and that was probably the best thing to do with a classroom of young teenagers, and probably the best way to go forward.
You know, for me, 1960 was the first year in which I voted, so that the world seemed to change that day. Olivier, I'm sure you're far too young to think in those terms, but that's how it hit me. What's your feeling?
Well, you're right that I'm not young, but I'm too young to remember the JFK assassination. I think what is hit home over the years as I've studied the Kennedy presidency in college and graduate school, and heard from people, is how much work was interrupted, or rather how much work he might have seen to fulfillment. I mean, you talk about projects like the Peace Corps. You talk about the Presidential Medal of Freedom. You talk about manned mission to the moon. Or if you're inclined to be a little more cynical, you look at a completely failed Cuba policy. A lot of things really started in that era, propelled by this extremely charismatic president, and he never got to see whether they would succeed or fail.
Molly.
At the same time, I mean, there was an outpouring of goodwill from the nation as the nation mourned that, and I think it is questionable whether things like civil rights legislation and a lot of the more ambitious legislation that Lyndon Johnson ended up implementing, if that would have been possible, were there not this sort of galvanizing national unity supporting the new president in the wake of the assassination?
An interesting point.